In 2022, the San Francisco Giants are going from a Hall of Fame catcher in Buster Posey, someone who commanded the respect of the entire staff and was a force at the plate, to a completely unproven tandem, really, of mostly Joey Bart, we think, and also Curt Casali, who's more proven, but certainly not the player that Posey was. So are the Giants really going to go into the season with those two as their primary catchers? We'll talk about it next.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily San Francisco Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Giants, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Kaspick, and on this show we provide daily episodes Monday through Friday talking about the San Francisco Giants in a way that's data-driven and rational, but also simple, passionate, and accessible to all. I'm a former contributor for the baseball statistics and analysis websites Beyond the Box Score and Rotographs. I've been podcasting about the Giants since 2015, and I'm a lifelong fan. Thanks for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. We're free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. Check us out there if you have not already. And hello to those of you watching on YouTube. You can listen wherever you get podcasts. And coming up on today's show, we're kind of going to incorporate some mailbag questions. And also I want to talk about some news regarding expanded rosters due to, the lockout and the delay and the short spring training. And also news about the two remaining arbitration eligible players who hadn't agreed to new deals by at the time of yesterday's recording. So we'll talk about those deals actually being settled and what the terms are, who the players were. But first, I just want to kind of jump into a mailbag question that ties in with something I've been thinking a lot about recently. And that question comes from Edward James Almost, who says, Joey Bart, can he be trusted to be the anchor for this revamped pitching staff? And my answer to that is no. I mean, I don't know. And if we look at 2020, I know some people really give me a hard time when I harp on 2020, and I get it. Bart was kind of thrust into a role in a very unusual circumstance. There was no minor league season, so he was just, at the alternate site, and they were all quarantining and facing their own teammates. And Buster Posey had opted out, and then he comes to the major leagues, makes his debut. There's nobody in the stands. He hadn't worked with the pitchers. He probably can't even hang out with them because they're all kind of quarantining and COVID's going on. So it was a very unusual circumstance. And yes, Bart had a couple of hand injuries. He got hit by pitches, I think, 2 different times in the minor leagues over the last couple of years. But the point stands. He's an unproven player, one who at his best according to prospect evaluators, was arguably a top 10, top 15 prospect in Major League Baseball. So he's no complete slouch. He was the number 2 overall pick in 2018. That being said, young players, especially catchers, just being handed primary roles, again, especially catchers, for teams that expect to compete is just not that common. In fact, if I had the time and the energy, I would look into this, but it just doesn't happen very often. One exception that comes to mind is Buster Posey in 2010 and how he kind of came in and just took the job and ran with it and became Rookie of the Year and World Series champion and MVP 2 years later, and then a Hall of Fame career after that. But Joey Bart is a very different type of player, and we saw the downside, the floor of Joey Bart in 2020. Again, I admit, very unusual circumstances, but we're talking about a guy who struck out 37% of the time, walked just under 3% of the time. Very, very poor strikeout to walk ratio. He had 41 strikeouts and 3 walks. That tells you a lot right there. On-base percentage was .288. He did not hit a home run. So I'm not saying that's the performance we should expect going into 2022, but I am saying it's a floor. And it's just a little bit risky for a team in the Giants' position. And you mentioned in the question, can he handle this revamped pitching staff? I mean, think about also, he had trouble catching pitches. Like he looked a little bit overwhelmed both at the plate and defensively. So I don't want to rag on the guy. I understand it was a very difficult situation to be thrust into. But my point is that if you're expecting to compete, it's just risky to say, okay, well, we hope that all those issues you demonstrated are just suddenly gone now. A player like Bart, a team like that's out of content, I don't know, the Baltimore Orioles, they do have a young catcher who's going to come up on their team as well, Adley Rutschman, but you can just let him go out there and let him kind of develop at the major league level. But for the Giants, I don't think they can afford that luxury. And so my question has always been, what happens if Bart does struggle? It's obviously a possibility. In fact, it may be more likely than not that he struggles. And then what happens? Of course, you can send him to the minor leagues, but then what? At the major league level, suddenly you're looking at Curt Casali as your number one catcher. And Casali is a good defensive catcher. He's got the leadership qualities with, I think pitchers love throwing to him. He's energetic back there. He's a good framer. He had that great record in games that he started. The team had a great record in games that he started. I really like Curt Casali, but to me, he's best suited as kind of a secondary catcher and not your primary guy. And then if he's your primary guy and Bart needs more time in the minors to kind of get back on track, who's the catcher after Casali? So to me, they, with opening day just over 2 weeks away, this position is unsettled. And that's why I've been looking at trade possibilities. And I know it's a little bit out there, and they do seem to be just heading in this direction of having this plan of Bart and Casali. I have said all offseason long, ever since Posey retired, and ever since we even talked about the possibility that Posey could retire, that I just wasn't convinced that they were going to let this be what they take into the season. And so when we're looking at trade possibilities, there's really only two major names that stand out to me. And one is Willson Contreras of the Chicago Cubs. And that's a very interesting one, particularly because of the behavior of the Chicago Cubs, given that they have Willson Contreras, obviously, and yet in the offseason, they went out and acquired the best free agent catcher, which is not to say the player they acquired was a great player. It was Yan Gomes on a 2-year, $13 million deal with a club option for 2024. But it is a little odd to acquire a catcher like that when you already have an established guy in Contreras, and the Cubs are kind of in a retooling. Don't want to call it quite rebuilding because they signed Marcus Stroman, they signed Seiya Suzuki, they claimed Wade Miley, they bring in Drew Smyly, bring in Andrelton Simmons. So they made some moves, but at the same time, they got the best free agent catcher out there, and Willson Contreras is entering the last year of club control, and I'm not entirely sure the Cubs are expecting to compete. Although on paper, I think they have a shot to be a wildcard team. I would put a couple teams ahead of them in the Central, at least the Brewers. But is Willson Contreras available? And so that's a question I have. And then the other possible trade target on a team that is clearly just selling everybody is Sean Murphy of the Oakland A's. And I know that Grant Brisbee of The Athletic threw out this possibility in an article recently. The issue I have with that possibility is that there's not really going to be a sense of urgency for the A's to move Sean Murphy. The reason the pitchers the A's are dealing makes sense to trade are because of where they are in terms of club control, almost reaching free agency. And Chapman and Olsen and, now Manaea, these guys are getting close to free agency, whereas Sean Murphy is still 4 years away from free agency. So there's no urgency to move him. Is he available? Probably. But I think Contreras, if the Cubs are willing to move him, probably makes more sense. However, it also makes some sense to just hold on to the plan that the Giants have. So coming up next, I want to continue this conversation. We're going to talk about what it might take to acquire Contreras, and to me, why it might make sense. And we're also going to get to more mailbag questions, including the Giants lineup against left-handed pitching. A lot of people are asking about that, so we're going to talk even more about that. So stay tuned, but first, this is the time of year I've pretty much given up on all of my New Year's resolutions, but not this year. I'm sticking to my resolution, believe it or not, all the way towards the end of March to eat right thanks to Built Bar. It almost feels like it's not really a resolution because I actually enjoy eating them. Have you tried the Puffs? If you haven't, you're missing out on one of Built Bar's best tasting bars. Puffs are the first ever protein-infused marshmallow. They're fluffy, they're marshmallowy, they're not just a protein bar, they're a treat, and they're covered in 100% real chocolate. You know it sounds delicious, and I'm telling you, you can eat these Puffs and feel good about eating them. If you go to Built.com and scroll down to the macros chart, you'll be blown away. Most Built Bars contain 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, and a whopping 17 grams of protein. Go to Built.com, use promo code LOCKED15 and get 15% off your order. Use promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com. All right, here we go. We are going to continue talking about the Giants catcher position. I foresee, here's the thing. There's a DH in the National League now, and so you can just hide Joey Bart in the number 9 slot, number 8, 7, 8, 9, whatever, and not have to rely on his offense potentially and let him develop. That makes a lot of sense. But if you're trying to back up a 107-win team, a team that won the division from the Dodgers, it just, to me, is a giant risk. So we'll talk about the possibility of a trade in a minute. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. We're free and available on all platforms. Locked On MLB Prospects host Lindsey Crosby is a prospect encyclopedia, and he's going deep on the MLB stars of tomorrow. It's free and available wherever you get podcasts. So yeah, I feel like I'm going out on a limb here talking about the Giants searching for a catcher. A lot of people give me a hard time about this, on Twitter at least, but Willson Contreras is a well above average offensive player, and my recollection of him is that he's not a good pitch framer, but when I go to Baseball Savant, they actually rate him as an above average pitch framer. And so I just think the whole package is really nice. He's not going to be Buster Posey. He's not a quite a middle of the order player, but he's kind of a guy who can hit you 6th in a lineup and be a really good 6th hitter in a lineup, and a really good hitting catcher. He's one of the few catchers who are above average offensively. And so that makes a lot of sense for the Giants. And it would all just depend on whether the Cubs are willing to sell at this point in time. The fact that they bring in Yan Gomes just really stands out to me as perhaps them setting themselves up to deal Contreras. Maybe they don't want to give him a big extension, and so it might make a lot of sense to trade him. So I think it's pretty clear that trading Joey Bart for Willson Contreras would be an overpay by the Giants. I think a lot of people are thinking I'm crazy for even mentioning those words in the same sentence at this point in time, but a lot of it does depend. The industry seems to be pretty down on Joey Bart, and I get it. It's a little bit unfair. He hasn't really had a chance to prove himself. Part of this stems from the fact that in AAA in 2021, I think a lot of people on first glance look at the batting line for Bart and think he had a great season. 294 average, 358 on base, 472 slugging. On paper, those are good numbers, but we have to consider what is the league average in the Pacific Coast League. And by the standards of that highly offensive environment, Bart was only 7 points above league average offensively. And when we consider the fact that he needed a 398 average on balls in play, which is unsustainably high, just to achieve 7% above average offense, it's a little bit of a red flag. And it just suggests that given a bigger sample of games, he may have been below average offensively in that league. And you also pair that with the fact that he struck out nearly 30% of the time in that league, and the walk rate was just 7.5%. So it's just a continuation of the type of issues we saw with Bart at the major league level. It just suggests to me we're going to see a strikeout rate north of 30%. We're going to see a walk rate around 5%. And he has to hit for power. Basically, that's the thing. If he's going to be a wild free swinger, chasing, have an on-base percentage maybe around 300 or below, 280, 290, that's not good. So you have to provide defensive value, which I think all the reports are that he can, but we haven't necessarily seen that yet, as he had trouble kind of working with certain pitchers. But I'm not saying he can't. I think that we all believe that Joey Bart can be a strong defensive catcher, but he's going to have to hit for power. That's going to have to be where his value comes from. So anyway, Fangraphs has Bart in terms of his prospect ranking all the way down. They made a top 100 list, and they, for whatever reason, had like 115 guys on their top 100. I guess they're trying to make the case that number 100 through number 115 are all exactly pretty much the same value. And they had Bart as the second to last player on this list. And just a couple years ago, they had him in the top 15. And so that just tells you how his value has fallen. And so in a perfect world, I think you would trade Joey Bart for a good catcher who's a little bit closer to free agency on a retooling team. If Willson Contreras had like 2 or 3 years of club control left, I think that would make more sense for the Giants. But given that it's only 1 year of club control, I'm just not convinced that would make any sense for the Giants. So it's hard to see a match. I think they're in a little bit of a situation where they're stuck, and that it might make the most sense just to ride or die with Joey Bart. But it could ultimately hurt their chances of making the postseason this year. And they're going to have to sign somebody else, in my opinion, because if Bart struggles and then it's just Casali, who's the next catcher in line? They had claimed a catcher off waivers from the Mariners, but he ends up being DFA'd and then claimed by the Twins when the Giants signed, I think Matthew Boyd was the guy that required the corresponding move there. So I don't know exactly what they're going to do. This is a very long-winded way of answering this question. I'm just not convinced they're done. I do want to point out Farhan Zaidi has said that the opening day roster is the most overrated roster because we spend all this time talking about it simply because we haven't had a roster in a long time since the end of the season. But, you have your opening day roster, and then by the end of the year, it looks very different. You've made trades, guys have established themselves, guys have struggled and then gotten sent out. So even if it's Bart and Casali to start the year, it doesn't mean things can't change. It doesn't mean a trade can't happen in season. They could see what they have in Bart. The risk is that if he struggles again, his value is going to fall even more, and then you've lost your opportunity when he still has some of that prospect shine on him. So I know I'm being really hard on Joey Bart. It's just his approach, his free swinging nature, the holes in his swing, it doesn't really match what this front office has kind of targeted. They target guys who have really good strike zone discipline and awareness, and that's not really Bart. It's not really the nature of his game. He's kind of a free swinger and not going to be a high on base percentage guy. It's just not really going to happen unless he changes his ways, which we haven't seen evidence of yet. Not saying it can't happen, but we haven't seen evidence of it yet. So coming up next, I want to talk about, like I said, the lineup against lefties a little bit, and the expanded rosters and how that impacts the Giants, and also the players who got new deals who were arbitration eligible. So stay tuned for that. But first, our next partner has a product I use literally every day. I started taking Athletic Greens because I wanted to see what all the hype was about. They sent us a sample, and it's delicious. So what is this stuff? With one delicious scoop of Athletic Greens, you're absorbing 75 high-quality vitamins, minerals, whole food sourced superfoods, probiotic, and adaptogens. I don't even know what that is, but they help you start your day right. This special blend of ingredients supports your gut health, your nervous system, your immune system, your energy, recovery, focus, and aging, all the things. It's lifestyle friendly, whether you eat keto, paleo, vegan, dairy-free, or gluten-free, and it costs less than $3 a day. You're investing in your health, and it's cheaper than your cold brew habit. Wow, it's like I'm talking to myself here with that one. Right now, it's time to reclaim your health and arm your immune system with convenient daily nutrition, especially heading into the flu and cold season. It's just one scoop in a cup of water every day. That's it. No more need for a million different pills and supplements to look out for your health. To make it easy, Athletic Greens is giving you a free 1-year supply of immune-supporting vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. And all you have to do is visit athleticgreens.com/MLB network. Again, that's athleticgreens.com/MLB network to take ownership over your health and pick up the ultimate daily nutritional insurance. All right, here we go. As promised, we have a lot to cover here. I kind of went off the rails talking about the Giants catching situation. I think it warrants that much attention, and I wouldn't put significant moves, I wouldn't put it past them even this late into the offseason. And if it's Bart and Casali, I think they're taking a big risk. And even then, I feel like they would have to add a catcher like they did with Jose Godoy, who they lost off waivers to the Twins. But, that was their choice. They DFA'd him to make room for, I think it was Boyd. But anyway, so look out for that. They also could add a second baseman. And part of this is that there's going to be expanded rosters for the month of April. So we're talking about over 3 weeks of the season at a critical time for the Giants, who, remember, their first road trip of the year was already kind of a tough one, a 3-city, 10-game road trip. And then because of the first 2 series of the season getting wiped out and then rescheduled, made up at other times throughout the year, Giants have a random 1-game series in Milwaukee at the end of what was already supposed to be a 10-game road trip. It was supposed to end with an off day, but instead now they fly to Milwaukee, play 1 game, and then fly home and then play a game the next day. So that is brutal, and that is the reality. So having expanded rosters up to 28 from 26 is a big deal for the Giants, and it's a big deal because they have some players who are out of minor league options, and this will allow them to carry those players, whoever they desire, really, and get to see them and get more of a sample of their performance and then make a decision after that. So it is very helpful for a team like the Giants because of the catching depth issue and because of the out of options players. So the players who are out of options that this affects for me, Mauricio Dubon. I call him Dubon, but I'm going to give up on that eventually throughout the year because everybody else calls him Dubon. But he is out of options, and I would expect him to make this team unless there's some kind of a trade that involves him. The Cubs for Willson Contreras, that could be a fit. Some of these out of options guys could make sense. But Dubon, he can play good defensive center field. He can play short. He can play second. He can move around. And a lot of people are asking me about the Giants against left-handed pitching. He could be a significant part of that, as he was in 2020, and he was supposed to be going into 2021. The thought was that he would be the not every day, but the platoon right-handed bat in center field. That was the plan going into last year. Again, opening day roster, most overrated roster, because Dubon, he fell off the face of the earth, got optioned down. Thairo Estrada surpassed him on the depth chart, and that was kind of it. We never really heard from him again. So another player this affects is Tyler Beede, who's out of options, and this very much affects him. He could stick on this staff. He could make a spot start or two. If there's an injury in the rotation, he can certainly be a guy who fills in there, but I would expect him to make the team with expanded rosters because he is out of options. So continuing to look through, Thairo Estrada, out of options. So I expect him to be on that opening day roster and possibly stick all season long. And he figures to be another new critical piece of the puzzle against left-handed pitching. A lot of people talking about how the loss of Donovan Solano is a big loss to the lineup. I have been saying all offseason long that I believe Thairo Estrada can just fill in and pick up exactly where Donovan Solano left off. I wouldn't so much say they lost Solano as they allowed him to move on. I think that it was always pretty clear, if you look at the way that their roster is constructed and the fact that Estrada is out of options, made a lot of sense to turn over that Solano spot on the roster and replace him with Thairo Estrada. And he did a really good job. Was just as good as Chris Bryant, actually, in less plate appearances, but the same number of games. So kind of an underrated contributor last year and figures to have a big role in 2022. So I think those are the 2 or 3 guys that this affects the most. Also, Steven Duggar, he has an option left, but having an extra roster spot could allow them to carry Steven Duggar. But I think that their lineup against left-handed pitching is a little bit underrated. Darren Ruff brought back Wilmer Flores. Those 2 guys can mash lefties, as can Austin Slater, Evan Longoria as well. And then the catchers, both right-handed, and so that helps as well. And so you can make a lineup where your only lefties in the lineup against a left-handed pitcher are Brandon Belt and Brandon Crawford. Lastly, just want to mention that Curt Casali and Dominic Leone got new deals for 2022. They're not going to go to arbitration. So the Giants have avoided arbitration with all their arbitration-eligible players. Yesterday, they signed Darren Ruff to an extension. They bought out both of his ARB years and then have a club option for a 3rd year. And they settled on a deal with Mike Yastrzemski for $3.7 million. He's under club control for 4 seasons. This is Casali's last year of club control. He gets $2.6 million. It's also Dominic Leone's last year of club control, and he gets $2.25 million. So that is all the time we have for today. Coming up later in the week, we're going to continue to look through the mailbag. We have a lot of other good questions and talk about any Giants news that comes up between now and then. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. Now make your second listen Locked On MLB. Paul Francis Sullivan, please call him Sully, brings you his unique perspective on the majors past and present. It's free and available wherever you get podcasts. Once again, my name is Ben Kaspick. Check me out on Twitter at Ben Kaspick, Kaspick. If you like this show, please consider rating it or leaving a review. It helps me out tremendously. So thank you in advance, and thanks to everyone who's done so already. I can't wait to be with you again tomorrow. We're daily show now, once again. So until then, see you next time.